And this morning, we're having a conversation about us, all of us. Because on the 1st of July 2022, we issued a statement indicating that Ghana was now willing to undergo an IMF program. At the time, we gave the usual reasons that you've come to know now. The war in Ukraine, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and COVID-19 had actually exposed our economy, and thus we needed to seek help from the IMF. We said it was only a balance of payment support. But prior to that, there had been lots of concerns. We had said, as a proud nation, we're never going to go. Well, as one of my guests would say, we had no choice but to go in an ambulance. It's been 10 months of negotiations. Finally, we have the deal. Many very excited, including our finance minister, who had always indicated initially we're never going to get into the deal, but after securing the deal, he's grateful to God and all of us. And the IMF is hopeful this will set us on the right path to economic recovery and building a strong and resilient economy. But the critical question is, what's in that program? Yes, balance of payment support of 3 billion over a 3-year period. It also would, bring back some confidence into the Ghanaian economy. But what must the Ghanaian economy give in order to access these funds? And in giving back, how would it affect us, you and me, including businesses? And that's a conversation we're having this morning. We are joined by Badu-Aboagye, who is the CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's in studio here with us. Professor Godfred Bokpin is a professor of economics at the University of Ghana Business Professor of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School. And we also have our own George Wiafe, who's been monitoring everything right from the beginning, also joining us via Zoom. So Professor Bokpin is on phone and George Wiafe is on Zoom. I'll take your initial thoughts and then we'll come back and expand the conversation. Let me start off with you, George Wiafe. So you've been following it. Finally, we have it. Finance Minister very excited. Tell us what this deal would mean for us briefly.
Well, it would mean in terms of confidence. If Westing you can hear me, because
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Of the economy where all those who matter were not convinced about what the government was doing. So what this program is doing is that it is actually going to force you to take those critical measures that you have to take to put that economy on that strong path. The bits about when people, the most important thing here, Westing, it's about the confidence restoration. Because if you engage a lot of business, and Mark might help me out, there were a lot of big projects that were on hold, there was so much uncertainty, and having this big brother come on board is going to give that assurance to others to also come on board. As the IMF itself would say, that unlocking donor support and finances into the economy. And that is what this program is gradually going to do. So for those who say that, $3 billion is nothing and why are we making so much noise about? Yes, it's nothing. But the more bigger picture is that now the program or the IMF is going to force you to be, if I use that expression, quote, fiscally disciplined. And therefore, those investors who have those big projects moving funds around are going to come in, and that would help in fast-tracking or stabilizing the economy. I'm sometimes a little bit worried for those who might be so excited because real bumpy roads ahead of us in terms of those measures that we have to undertake to aid in the recovery of the economy, bring our revenues to levels that are supposed to bring it to us in the economy, to finance our expenditure or support our expenditure. And some would say that, Winston, should we really be making noise about conditionalities? Because these are things that government should have done over the years. You have a huge bill in the energy sector or arrears in the energy sector. The argument about who caused some might be another day altogether. And still, people who are consuming the power are said not to be paying the right level of tariffs.
Okay.
Again, how do you ensure that gradually there is some marginal adjustment that is not hitting people badly? So these are some of the broad things that we should be looking at when the fund says that it is seeking to restore macroeconomic stability and front-loading fiscal consolidation that will help improve our financial situation as a country, Winston.
I'll get back to you, George, later because I know that you've been looking at our program and you've talked about things that we have to do. We'll discuss those things in detail. But let me get, Professor Bokpin's initial, thoughts on this program. Professor Bokpin, so there you go. We have it. Finally, we've been having conversations. We've looked forward to this day, and that day has finally come. What do you make of the program? And briefly, what do you think it means for us?
Okay, thank you very much, Winston. Good morning to our cherished listeners. Yes, finally, we are here. And as you rightly said, the last 6 months or so, all that Ghana has been waiting for and preparing for its arrival is the IMF program. So here we are. In as much as it's good news, merely getting an IMF program is not an achievement to be celebrated. The program actually represents Ghana's failures over the years. When you read the program document, I'm sure you have a copy now.
Yes, I do.
You will see, and as George Wiafe said, you will see failed actions over the years that have accumulated and suffocating the economy. You see the IMF now coming back to the reality that the external shocks in the form of Russia-Ukraine only exacerbated pre-existing conditions. And we have said this long ago. So for anyone in their imagination to have assumed that Ghana found itself in this precarious situation because of simply Russia-Ukraine has a poor reflection of where we have come from. And as a country, in as much as it's good news, it's also a sad day for me because this is not the first time we have gone to the IMF. This is our 17th IMF-supported program. And what that tells you is that we have demonstrated that we are people who are not competent enough to consistently manage our own affairs and undermine our sovereignty as a country, our economic sovereignty. Also, Winston, if you look at the program and the measures and all that is in the program, I am confident that we have spoken about more than 90% of them in the last 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
That we needed to do. And the reason I'm drawing on this is to compare Ghana to Malaysia and Singapore. And where in the case of Malaysia and Singapore, it had been concluded that they had practically implemented IMF programs without the IMF. So many of the things we've been talking about, academics, CSOs, that we needed to do and we failed to do, and all of that are all here. That said, Winston, I have a problem with the program design. And by the time we are done, it will leave more Ghanaians vulnerable than it sought to achieve. I will tell you why.
Okay, please do.
We have said that Ghana's problem is not so much of the fact that we are not generating more revenue. We know that our tax to GDP ratio is low, but Ghana is not an outlier in that space. And that a sport child, in as much as that sport child needs more money, that sport child needs more discipline and measures to tackle corruption. I have gone through the program. The program is very largely mute on corruption measures. The program is largely mute on a wasteful expenditure cuts. The program is heavily based on revenue-based expenditure, revenue-based fiscal consolidation. And I think by design, that is an error. Why am I saying so? If you look at Ghana and Malaysia from the 60s, per capita GDP and all of that, we're almost at the same time, in the same level. In fact, Ghana's GDP per capita in 1960-61 was higher than that of South Korea. But Winston, guess what? If you look at the tax to GDP ratio of Malaysia in the last couple of years, it has been practically below 15%. If you look at the tax to GDP ratio of Singapore, you can check from the OECD and the other databases, right? You will see that their tax to GDP ratio has been below 16%. Ghana's tax to GDP ratio at some point in time, quite recently, was more than 17%. All that I'm trying to put across is that we think it is wrong to assume that our problem can be solved largely by collecting more revenue. What the program failed to do, from what I have read, is that it failed to place greater emphasis also on wasteful expenditure cuts and addressing corruption. Without that, and the IMF unfortunately concludes with government that the way out is more revenue. Yes, we all agree. And also, it is unfortunate that we think that we can scale up tax to GDP ratio through the tax handles that we have right now, which are more inequality worsening, which increases poverty rather.
Okay, Prof,
now,
you know what we're going to do, Prof? Kindly hold on. We'll come back because these are your preliminary thoughts. Let me just take marks and then we come back and expand. We'll also look at, how, for instance, the government intends to increase revenue, how it tends to increase revenue, revenue administration, and all the, policies that it intends to implement in ensuring that we're able to achieve that. We'll focus more on that because that's actually, and, the fund is right. It talks about the fact that the staff supports the authority's preference for a fiscal strategy that is based on a significant revenue increase. And the emphasis on a significant revenue increase. Mark, for many of you had been complaining in the past. As businesses, you had talked about how the rate of inflation and how the exchange rate were affecting you. You had been told that, hold on a minute, let's get the IMF deal, and we're sure we'll be able to deal with all of these things. Now that we've gotten the deal, you're excited?
Let me say it's a good news. Excitement for me is another thing. Prior to that, for me, we have lost all the key ingredients of a very good business environment. We have lost confidence in the economy, instability in the macroeconomic environment, and high level of uncertainties. These are things or items that negatively impact business activities. For instance, business would want to be able to predict the future with certainty. We got to a level where we couldn't do that. Constantly, we get calls from people with money who would want to invest in the economy. And because of lack of confidence, they will always ask you, is the IMF deal coming? Are you sure you'll be able to turn your economy around? And I've had calls to always explain to them. We had a delegation chamber coming to Pakistan, coming to Ghana just last week. And one of the questions that they kept asking was, how are you going to turn your economy around? If I should invest my money in your economy, is there the likelihood that I'm going to get good returns and my capital? So the economy has been deteriorated to a level where that confidence was not there. With this IMF facility, it is bringing the confidence back. Just the announcement that the bilateral creditors have given us an assurance. We saw what happened with the CD as against the dollar. And also with this announcement of approval, you've seen significant improvement in the CD against the dollar. So gradually we are getting the confidence back. For me, that is very key. But in terms of excitement, I don't think we should jubilate that we've got an IMF deal. For me, it's not a key performance indicator for any government. to be looking at. Since 1957, almost all the president or all the government, they've taken us to IMF. What we should be looking at now, and as one of the key performance indicators that we should give to any government, is that you have to ensure that you manage the economy very well to the extent that you don't take us to IMF. Then all of us will be excited. If you are excited that somebody has taken us to IMF and been able to get us a deal, then I think it's in a way mediocrity in our thinking. Because IMF, you go there when you have challenges. You go there when you have run your economy down. Even the name for the money they are giving to us, IMF bailout. They are bailing you out because you have ruined your economy. You've gotten to a level where your economy is collapsing. So don't let us get to that level and be excited, possibly popping champagne and also eating kenke in excitement. But now let's now begin to think about the mitigation measures from the conditions that will be coming to us. From Prof's statements, you realize that there's a lot of difficulties ahead of us. And these things are going to impact on the activities of businesses.
Okay. Go ahead.
So businesses thrive in a certain environment. We are hoping that with this IMF deal, inflation will come down. With this IMF deal, the cedi will gain more and be strengthened against the major trading currencies. With this IMF deal, the central bank will respond positively by reducing the policy rate, and the lending rate will also come down. The private sector is ready to take up and expand if all these things that I've spoken about, all these conditions are favorable. That is where the economy will be thriving. So for businesses, of course, we've gotten to a level where without this deal, probably the economy would have collapsed. So now at least we have a sound footing going to the future. And I'm hoping that the authorities will do the right thing to ensure that we sustain the gains that we have made. If you look at other countries that receive IMF bailout, some of them went back and they saw deterioration in their macroeconomic indicators and variables. How do we sustain the gains that we have made to the extent that we give some relief to businesses and the private sector? That is where I am looking at. Prices may not necessarily go down because we have received IMF deal. Prices will go down because all the variables that fit into the cost of production are going down. A typical business will determine price based on the cost and the margin. So if interest rates are going down, if the cedi is stable, inflation is going down, and of course, all the other cost of production, electricity, water, if they are all going down, then definitely businesses will respond positively by reducing prices. You are now, all of us are happy because we have an IMF deal, stability in the foreign exchange market and all those things. But we have also announced an increment in electricity. It's like you are adding and you are subtracting. You are asking drivers to reduce transportation by 10%. But you have increased electricity. We have introduced 2 new taxes. The 10% as compared to the increase in cost of production out of electricity and also out of the taxes is higher than the reduction. So definitely, people may be expecting a decrease in prices, but it may not happen as soon as we expect because a lot of things will have to go into the computation before businesses will react to that.
I'll get back to you, Mark, because we need to get into the details, but you've actually given an indication that, well, you know, if the rate of inflation goes down, if lending rates go down, may actually lead to some reduction in the price of goods and services. The head of the IMF has been speaking following the approval of Ghana's program. Let's listen to her first, and then you also hear from Finance Minister Ken Ofrecha. So we'll be listening to Kristalina Georgieva as she spoke about how this deal will impact Ghana's economy.
I'm very pleased that the IMF Executive Board has approved a 3-year, $3 billion support for this program. We are proud to be partners with Ghana in addressing the difficult economic and financial conditions the country is facing. Today's decision is also a major milestone for the G20 Common Framework. The commitment by the Official Creditors Committee to help make Ghana's debt sustainable was essential for the approval of the funds program, and it signals important progress in the G20 Common Framework. The decision our board has taken is the beginning of the work we will do together with the authorities of Ghana for the implementation of the program for the benefit of the people of Ghana.
Our bilateral and development partners, all our investors, and the IMF for their commitment and the sacrifices that have made it possible for us to achieve an IMF program in record time. It has not been an easy 10-month journey, but by the abundant grace of God and of sheer grit and determination to place Ghana firmly back onto strong economic footing, the impossible has been made possible, and we thank God for that. Ghana's IMF board approval is far from a magic solution wand. What is, however, is the crucial first step on the necessary journey of strong reforms, inclusive growth, and relentless pursuit of a growth agenda geared towards returning Ghana's economy to a place of strength, prosperity, and resilience. I take this opportunity to call on all Ghanaians, investors, bilateral and development partners to take up the cause of Ghana and support the government in the implementation of the PC-PEG-backed IMF ECF program.
Right, so you heard from the MD of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva first, and then Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. I still have George Wiafe with me and Professor Godfred Bokpin, as well as Mark Badu-Aboagye. So, George, let me just wrap this up with you so that you would leave us. So, we're told that we should expect some $600 million. When is that likely to hit our account?
Well, normally, I mean, for international transaction challenges and all the rest, normally it should take minimum 2 to 3 days or 4 days for these monies to waste and hit Bank of Ghana's account. So if it's not this Friday, latest by next week, that money should come, or that money should be transferred directly to the Bank of Ghana's account. Winston, don't forget that this one was just because we had met all the preconditions. The next tranches that are going to come will be tied strictly to meeting certain conditions of the program. So if you don't meet those conditions, Winston, those monies would just not come. And so that is what it means in terms of these monies, the drawdowns we are going to get from the IMF, that will come to Ghana's Bank of Ghana's account to support Ghana's balance of payment needs. We understand that the World Bank is also going to advance almost $1 billion to government. That will go directly to projects identified in the budget over the next 3 years. So this one is specifically for the Bank of Ghana, our balance of payment needs to finance imports and all the rest. And the expectation is that if the bank is on board, if the IMF is on board, then it will unlock other partners also to come on board, strictly tied to meeting conditions. And as I said earlier on, these are things that we should have done over the years. What this program is doing is just to force you to take those corrective measures to put your economy back on a strong footing.
George, so apart from the 600 million, how much are we expecting again from the IMF this year?
This year, we are looking at a total amount of about $1.2 billion to come from the IMF. And so the second tranche should come somewhere in November or December or even January. But the fund will be in town in June to do the staff level review as well, to ensure that we are on track. So when these benchmarks are met, these qualitative indicators are met, then the drawdowns, or Ghana can access this drawdown. But if you miss them and you don't get any waiver, don't forget what happened to Zambia. So it is not an automatic thing that because you've gotten the program by the board, automatically everything is going to come to you. You have to meet those critical benchmarks before the board will approve those disbursements to come to you.
Great. George Wiafe, thank you very, very much for joining us. We're grateful to you. That's editor of Joy Business, George Wiafe, joining us. Let me get back to you, Professor Bokpin, because earlier you had raised some concerns. Mark Badu-Aboagye in studio has talked about how, in his belief, he says it's good news. He hopes that once the city's rate of depreciation ceases and the city begins to appreciate, he expects the prices of goods and services to go down, because then the rate of inflation, all things being equal, will go down. The Bank of Ghana would reduce the policy rate, even though there are a lot of discussions and they feel they should probably be maintaining it now, but in the next quarter or so they could be reducing it. And for him, all of these would lead to some improvement. Is that not beneficial? I mean, is that not beneficial to us?
Yes, Winston, that is beneficial to us. We are not discounting that, actually. We have placed emphasis on that. We have welcomed the board approval. And Winston, you will see clearly that the signal from the IMF for Ghana to reach out have been clear from 2021. Now, because we delayed in making that crucial decision, the vulnerabilities became worse. So what the program as we have it right now has more to do with the urgency of the IMF in helping Ghana than we are and our leaders. We can say that without any shame. And I think that if there's any credit from this approval, the IMF deserves it. If you look at the urgency with which they came to this country after 1st July, when the call was made to the IMF, you could see that they had already booked their tickets waiting for that call. If you look at the speed with which the staff level agreement was reached on December 12th, even working through holidays and weekends, it tells you the urgency with which the IMF places on helping Ghana. If you look at the role the IMF has played in getting our external bilateral creditors to come to a common framework through the official creditor committee, co-chaired also by China, in securing the funding assurance, you see the urgency with which the IMF attaches to Ghana's situation. So, to that extent, that which we fail to generate ourselves in terms of policy credibility, the IMF program brings that on board. The positive sentiment surrounding the arrival of the program in itself will manifest explicitly in certain macro variables, including exchange rates. But you can also go back to history and look at how the data respond, the economy responds. Sometimes many of these gains have been very temporary. Very temporary. So in as much as this is good news, what this means is that it's now time to work harder. Why am I saying so? Across several fronts. The next Trans George will be performance driven. Part of that may also be beyond even Ghana, because the funding assurance that we have received from Ghana's bilateral creditors, the details are now going to be worked out.
Okay.
So one of the program objectives is to restore debt sustainability. That is largely contingent on how Ghana's creditors actually respond to this program outcome and how quickly they work out the details in terms of the level of debt relief or fresh funding that must come to Ghana.
Okay.
That is not the end. That is just external. If one of the program objectives is again debt sustainability, our external commercial, Winston, is about $14.6 billion, external commercial. I'm talking about Eurobond.
Yeah.
So we are now going to approach the Eurobond creditors in debt restructuring. The progress we can make there, we don't have total control. Remember, the draconian approach that the government adopted with the restructuring of the domestic debt, that same approach will not work with external commercial Eurobond holders.
Okay.
So that is one challenge we need to bear in mind. That we need to have a strategy to navigate our way through all of this. Then also, Winston, as part of the prior actions, the domestic debt restructuring that we have done, government made minimal progress. We still have about 123 billion cedis of the domestic debt to be restructured. That is work. Winston, if you look at the structural benchmarks under the program and then the quantitative targets under the program from now to 2026, it tells you work. In the medium term,
Now let's look at one thing. I mean, since you're talking about the structural programs, I'm just looking at I had earlier raised that the staff supported authorities' decision to go for a fiscal structure that is based on significant revenue increase.
Yeah.
And that is in paragraph 24. Let me just read paragraph 24. Get your thoughts on it, and then I'll get back to Mark Badu-Aboagye in studio. Listeners, this morning we're having a conversation about Ghana's IMF program. Now that it's been approved, what's in it for us? What could be the benefit or the challenge? Because now we have in front of us the detailed program and policies. And we're joined by Mark Badu-Aboagye, who is CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Professor Godfred Bokpin, Professor of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Now, it says to address these challenges and achieve the program's revenue mobilization objectives, the authorities are preparing a medium-term revenue strategy. Now, this strategy will focus on tax policy and revenue administration measures necessary to reach the authorities' program revenue objectives over the 2023-2026 period. An IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department Tax Diagnostic Mission identified the following potential measures to sustainably generate significant revenue while addressing efficiency and equity concerns. Let's listen to these potential measures. I, removing VAT exemptions, which are estimated at close to 2% of GDP. 2, reforming the CIT by phasing out tax holidays and exemptions and strengthening safeguards against profit shifting. 3, I beg your pardon, reducing customs exemption. 4, increasing progressivity in personal income taxes. 5, automatically adjusting fuel levies by exchange rate movement or inflation. I'll take that again. Automatically adjusting fuel levies by exchange rate movement or inflation. Adopting new fiscal regime for the extractive industries. And the Fiscal Affairs Department is also providing technical assistance in designing the medium-term revenue strategy. And along with Ghana's development partners, will continue supporting implementation of the strategy. And the medium-term revenue strategy will be approved by Cabinet and published by end of September 2023. That's a structural benchmark, and will serve as input into the 2024 budget. Professor Bokpin.
Yes, there you go. We have said that long ago. Winston, the tax measures, the handles will be assessed. Remember, Ghana government has committed Ghanaians under this program to significantly scale up tax to GDP ratio to about 18.2%.
Yeah.
Winston, for any country to even move its tax to GDP ratio by 1 percentage point is cost to businesses, households. So for a country that is already stretched up, to make that commitment that we, over a 3-year period, just 36 months, we will move tax to GDP ratio, even to increase tax to GDP by 1 percentage point, Winston, is a lot of work and a lot of pay. And to move that from below 13% to 18.2% by 2026 tells you that the journey ahead needs to be monitored. That said, look at the interesting thing. Winston, if you pick Ghana's VAT in the books, it tells you that our standard VAT rate is 15%, and that is a lie. The effective incidence of our VAT is over 21%, yes, and it's one of the highest in the whole of Africa. Today, if you went to a shop, a VAT registered shop, and you bought something, the layers of taxes take more space on your receipt than the item you bought. You check.
Yes, you're right. We've seen it.
So if you went to a shop today, you bought something, the classification of taxes on it is more than the number of items you bought.
Okay. So, Prof, let's look at...
That is not the end. Winston, I'll conclude very soon and then your colleague will come in.
Yes.
My colleague will come in. That is not the only thing. We are looking at progressively scaling up personal income tax. Already, the income tax bracket for the higher income tax earners is 35%.
Yeah.
That is not the end. But what even makes it more interesting is that corporate income tax in our books, it tells you that it's 25%. That creates an impression that Ghana has one of the lowest corporate income tax. But the effective tax on companies, especially the banking industry, is over 36%. When you account for the banking sector recovery levy,
yeah,
and now growth and sustainability levy,
yeah,
effectively, it's more than 36%. That is not the only thing. Now we are talking about removing VAT exemptions and all of that. So the point that I'm making is that if you are courting growth, which is fundamental, more importantly, resilient, inclusive growth, this is the wrong approach.
Let me just get your view on this one, because it talks about that on fuel, that automatically adjusting fuel levies by exchange rate movement or inflation.
Yes.
What's that?
So, we have arrears that stays on the books of the state because we are not passing on the cost build-up to the final consumer, export price fuel. So when the cedi depreciates, we have been unwilling to pass on that cost. The fact that you don't pass it on doesn't mean it's paid. These are accumulated arrears. So as part of the program, the adjustment mechanism will be such that the pass-through effect is almost synchronous or almost automatic. Let me put it that way. So that as part of the program, whilst we try to clear the legacy debt or arrears, we don't accumulate any further. So that is one layer of the adjustment. Now, Winston, that is not the only thing. As part of the program, we should expect regular, predictable utility adjustment as part of the program. And I'm sure, I think my colleague there mentioned the impact of that as against the reduction in other macroeconomic variables. That's real. For the first time in our recent times, Winston, there is an expenditure item in our budget called other expenditure. In the 2023 budget, that is approximately 28 billion cedis. If you look at the composition of that, it's largely our indebtedness to the independent power producers, arrears in the energy sector value chain. So as part of this program, we are aiming at neutralizing that legal arrears and whilst we forestall or prevent any further accumulation. So what it means is that in as much as the IMF program is good news, we should just understand that we should brace ourselves up for impact landing. When I say so, I'm not blaming the IMF or anything, and I lean towards what Wiafe said, that part of the conditionalities that we say IMF conditionalities, these are deferred actions that we should have done over the years, and if we had done so, the impact wouldn't have been as significant as accumulating them, and within the shortest possible time. Remember, the time is not on the side of the IMF. The program is 3 years, and they have to make sure that within the 3 years, right, all these adjustments are carried through. And that is why the IMF made utility adjustment one of the prior action. And the projection was that the utility adjustment on the 1st February, that was, I think, slightly below 30%, was supposed to have gone up by 60%. Okay? But of course, the authorities were also mindful of the backlash, right? And all of that. If you heard, I think 2 days ago or so, our president, I'm sure he knew and he is aware that it was advising PURC to be gradual in the utility adjustment. I read it online, right? So the next 3 years, we have to go through certain painful adjustments. But my worry is that when we have gone through this without significant expenditure-based fiscal consolidation and cutting of wastefulness, Ghana would only return to the IMF faster than we've done in the past.
Great. Let me just bring Mark in at this point in time. I'll get back to you because, the bit about the fuel levies, and we are, for many people who are excited about the fact that, if the city appreciates, now it says these levies should be automatically adjusted when there's exchange rate changes and also when there's inflation. That means we'll be seeing a continuous rise. Let me get to you, Mark Badu-Aboagye. You earlier expressed some bit of hope that this was going to, lead to some good deals for you in business. But as we began going into the details, have you changed that position?
Well, Winston, that's we usually say the devil is in the details. And then after reading the Article 24, I'm so much worried about what is ahead of us as businesses and also as citizens of Ghana. The IMF facility is not a panacea in itself. What it does, as you have all said, is to help us stabilize the economy. You need the private sector to ensure that we get the growth. So whatever conditionalities are there, we should be careful to look at the negative impact of these conditionalities on the activities of businesses. IMF will not give you money to invest in infrastructure. It requires the private sector to do that. Already, the environment is harsh. I get worried when anybody says that businesses in Ghana are not paying taxes. And that is totally wrong. As Prof said, sit down and calculate and realize that the issue is not with businesses or those who are paying. The issue is with those who are not paying. And of course, as we've been saying, broadening the tax net. We usually compare our tax revenue to GDP to the other countries. But what we have failed to do is to compare the number of possible taxpayers, those who are paying and those who are supposed to pay. If you take Ghana, for instance, those who are supposed to pay tax are about 15 million. Only 5 million are paying, and substantial amount of this are businesses. A typical case is that all the government agencies are now authorities, and they are charging fees and levies. are those fees calculated as part of our tax to GDP? If they are not, then they should begin to do that, and they will know that businesses are paying more. Because aside paying your corporate tax, the taxes and levies that you are paying are all part of the cost of production. So if you are comparing, then compare also to those countries and look at those who are paying. What we need to do with this is that they should consult the businesses and the private sector whenever they are coming out with policies like this, and not to sidestep them or sideline them and come out with taxes as they did with the 3 key taxes that they introduced. Getting tax revenue is not only about increasing the tax rate, because research has shown that if you increase the tax rate to a certain level, the revenue that will come out of the tax will drop. And the Laffer curve is clear for everybody to see. Anybody can go and read. And that is the level that we are getting to. We sleep, the next day we come out and we are increasing the tax rate, thinking that people will pay. Businesses are businesses and they are profit oriented. They will find a legal way of not paying the taxes. And this was obvious when we introduced the e-levy. And of course, I'm also a bit skeptical about us getting the revenue that we require from the 3 taxes that we have introduced. So if aside all this, you are going to introduce more taxes, then what we are saying is that the cost of production will go up. The inflation that we are all seeking to bring it down will not come, or the rate at which we expect that it will decline will not be like that. The policy rate will stay up there, because the key role of the central bank is to ensure that inflation is coming down. So if out of these conditionalities, inflation is up there, then we expect that the central bank will keep the policy rate at where it is. And of course, it's going to affect the activities of businesses. If we do that, we will end up getting the IMF money, but in terms of growth and resilience, the economy will continue to be weak. So for me, we should be careful with this. We should consult more and get the ideas of almost everybody that matters when it comes to these policies. Our consultation when it comes to introduction of policies has been poor. And if you look at the roadmap to this IMF, we realize that at any point that they introduce something, you get people fighting against it. If they have consulted enough, have had people to make their input in what they are doing, and people are comfortable with it, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are now. So they should listen. Businesses are ready to support the government to ensure that this deal become a success. It's in the interest of all of us, because when we have a stable environment, businesses will also thrive. But we should be careful with this. That's why I'm saying that in rejoicing, in pumping champagne, we should end it now and look at how we are going to mitigate the negative impact of these conditionalities on businesses and the people of Ghana.
Great, I'll get back to you, but let me just say that this morning we're joined by Badu-Aboagye, who is CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Professor Godfred Bokpin, Professor of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School, talking about parties on State of Play this afternoon, 2:30 p.m. on Facebook. We're talking about Ghana's IMF approval and why Ken Ofo-Atta cannot afford to throw a Kenke party this time around. We're still, we're discussing Ghana's IMF program. Now we have the program. We're going through it. We have Badu-Aboagye, who is CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, joining us in studio. Professor Godfred Bokpin is Professor of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School, joining us on phone. And we have Haruna Idrisu, who is Member of Parliament for Tamale Central. He's also joined us on phone because he wants to share a view on Ghana's IMF program. He's former minority leader in Parliament. Honorable Haruna Idrisu, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Winston. Bless you and the team.
Great.
We are going through another intervention of international financing for purposes of policy credibility, to prepare the country to be able to access the international financial capital market. it appears to me that the IMF ECF that the government of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo and Bawumia have signed is an over-ambitious one. And it's over-ambitious in the sense that it is going to affect the fiscal space that may be available to a successor government. It may be a John Mahama government, an NDC government tomorrow. Inherent in this agreement is that there shall be no non-concessionary borrowing between now and 2027. As part of the agreement they reached with the IMF. There shall be no access to non-concessionary borrowing. So it means that, say, for concessionary financing, government may not be able to borrow between now and 2027. Nana Addo Dankwa, we will bid him farewell January 7, 2025. So it's encumbering the fiscal space that may be available for a successor government. That is what excessive and reckless borrowing does to an economy. Apart from the debilitating effect on the private sector, on businesses, on employment, I just think that this IMF deal is over-ambitious. What we need to do as a country is to resolve, one, even the so-called Memorandum of Understanding with Bank of Ghana. Why do we have a Public Financial Management Act? Are we respecting it? Why do we have a Fiscal Responsibility Act? Why are we keeping it in suspension and not keeping it functional? How do we expand our export base in order to improve our forex regime? There are many contractors out there who think that once the IMF train have arrived, life is normal for them and tomorrow will be good with payment. That is not the case. Government owes it to explain to the Ghanaian public its economic recovery program, and that largely all this money is meant for balance of payment support, is to boost the Bank of Ghana's forex standard. But my disappointment is that Ghana may not be able to access the international capital market immediately, as we are being made to believe by some actors from the finance ministry. Fidelity and truth to information is important for purpose of planning, apart from contributing to the collapsing of our banks and loss of jobs. Winston, thank you.
All right, Honorable Haruna Diso, thank you very much for that information and those thoughts that are shared with us. Mark Badu-Aboagye, let's wrap this up. So, before I get to Professor Bokpin, you've been reading bits and pieces of it. So, for all of us who are expecting that times are going to be better, and you as industry are going to see a boom and by extension a reduction in prices, what are you telling us?
Yes, I think we should begin to think about how we can get a fine balance between the stability that we want and also empowering the private sector. Now, we were aware that this IMF deal definitely will come out with conditionalities that will not or may not be in favor of businesses. It also likely depends on how we are going to implement these conditionalities. If you look at what we read, it looks as if that much of the emphasis is on tax or revenue generation, which if you look at the structure of economy, largely it will be on taxes. I would also call on the government to look at also the expenditure aspect of it, so that we look at the two handles and see how we can support businesses along this line. We cannot kill businesses because we have IMF money, because IMF in itself will not employ anybody. The government in itself clearly stated that it doesn't have the luxury of employing a lot of people. So the emphasis now is on businesses to expand, to employ people. Now, if you are able to strengthen the private sector and increase our export, we will get even more money than what IMF is giving to us. If we add value to our raw material, which I've said over and over again, then all of us are going to increase productivity, of which the businesses are ready to do. Export is key. That is where our focus should be. So anything within these conditionalities that will impact negatively on businesses, that will increase the cost of production, and that will increase taxes, and then affect profit of businesses, we should have a second look at it. I believe that we can do it. We have done it before. And then, as I said, it also requires consultation and ensuring that all of us, we make input into it. Ghana will survive, but our survival largely also depends on how the private sector or businesses are doing. That is where we should look at. Let us now begin to think about the businesses that we have, the challenges they are going through. How do we provide support to them? If you identify sectors with high potential to grow and ensure that we have resilient economy, we should do that. But my major concern also is how we are obsessed with macroeconomic variables and also solving economic situations all over with macroeconomy. In fact, in economies that are always using the macroeconomy are economies that have walked the path of micro. And the micro is the foundation of every economy. The household, the businesses. How are businesses performing? If our businesses are resilient, we will not suffer from the effect of the COVID-19 that much. We wouldn't have suffered from the effect of Russia-Ukraine war, because all the things that probably would have imported from Russia and Ukraine that negatively impacted our foreign exchange would have produced them here. So let us begin to produce at least the basic things that we need here. Government won't do that. It's businesses that will do that. But it will require that government will create the right environment for businesses. It's two-way affairs, because government has the power just to come out with policies. Once they do that, Winston, trust me, businesses in Ghana are very, very ready. I told you last time that we conducted a research, the chamber, and we realized that the SMEs in Ghana are growth oriented, which means that giving them the opportunity, they can grow to become multinationals. But when you introduce externalities like taxes, like high interest rates, like levies, then you go to their bottom line and you realize that all of them are making losses, which means that that component needs to be managed. And that is where my concern is, because these conditionalities will or may worsen that aspect of support that we need to give to businesses. So let's work together to ensure that this IMF deal becomes a success, both in the interest of Mother Ghana and also in the interest of businesses.
Great. Let me bring you in, Professor Godfred Bokpin. And so, but you know, we've seen one thing, and we started talking about it. The tax exemptions going forward, we're advised to stop that. That should be welcome news for you, isn't it? Hello, Professor Bokpin.
Hello.
Yes, Prof. Yes, I'm listening.
And especially the abuse with politically connected businesses who import and take advantage of that. So that is good news. So listen, when we say that taxes, it may not immediately take the form of new tax handles, but there's going to be a lot of revisions to the existing tax measures that may result in you paying more taxes, and a combination of that, okay? Because the goal we have set for ourselves is to increase tax to GDP ratio. And I think I lean towards the president of the Ghana Chamber of Commerce, also in your studio,
yes,
that in fiscal consolidation, and actually he was right, and that is consistent with the theoretical development and empirical regularity in that area, that in achieving fiscal consolidation, you are looking at a mix of expenditure and revenue that balances the risk and opportunities. That is what a country needs to do. When you tilt it more towards the other side, what it means is that in your attempt to repair the public sector balance sheet, that is going to impact the balance sheet of the private sector and households. And by the time you realize, you will not get the much needed impact So, for instance, let's ask ourselves, in the next 3 years, how many people, as a result of the implementation of this program, will be taken out of poverty? Okay? Let's ask ourselves, let's cost it. In fact, beyond, look, I'm not discounting the role of the IMF. Look, they've been helpful, but the best helping hand we can find as a country is at the end of our own arm. So let's ask ourselves, let's cost it. In the next 3 years that we implement this program, how would we narrow inequality? Let's ask ourselves, in the next 3 years that we are going to implement these measures, how many jobs can we create, especially from the private sector?
Okay.
Let's ask ourselves, let's cost it. In the next 3 years, by implementing these measures, how would we boast greater economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth? Let's cost it. In the next 3 years, let's ask ourselves, how would this improve health outcome? How would this improve quality of education? How would this get us closer to Ghana's dream?
Okay.
If we are able to assess that, because, this is Washington, Ghana government agreeing on some objectives and goals for us. Let's also build national consensus around it. And then we come to the conclusion that, yes, we agree with some of the measures that are in the program, and of course, we can't disagree with all of them. But there are some of them which we think that if we implement them in the form that they are, the negative effect would outweigh the positive outcome.
All right,
and
Professor
therefore,
Bokpin.
we are proposing this. The IMF itself will be amenable.
Professor Godfred Bokpin, thank you very, very much for joining us. And also thank you very much, Mark Badu-Aboagye, for joining us.